Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The Lost Diary.
It's been about 3 months since Julia and I broke up. I thought I'd finally gotten past it. The sleepless nights, the constant reminders of her scattered all over my apartment. But tonight, as I was packing up the last of her things, I found something I hadn't noticed before. Tucked away behind a box of old DVDs in the closet was a small, leather-bound journal. I immediately recognized it as hers. The worn cover and slightly frayed edges told me it had been hidden there for a while. My first instinct was to toss it into the box with the rest of her belongings, but something made me stop. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the lingering questions I had about how our relationship had ended. I sat down on the floor, holding the journal in my hands for what felt like forever, debating whether I should open it. Part of me knew it wasn't my place to read her private thoughts, but another part of me, the part that still felt haunted by her absence, needed answers. So, I opened it. The first few entries were innocent enough, just the usual musings of someone going through life. Work, friends, small moments of happiness. But the deeper I went, the more personal the entries became. She wrote about me, about us. I was expecting that. But what I wasn't expecting were the things she wrote about our time together, events that I had no memory of. She described small moments, arguments we never had, strange occurrences in our apartment, feelings of unease that I never noticed. At first, I thought she was just exaggerating, maybe even misremembering things. But as I read on, the details became darker. She wrote about feeling watched, followed, and even mentioned hearing things at night that I had never noticed. There was one entry about a night when she woke up and saw a shadow standing at the foot of our bed, watching us. I stopped reading after that. I felt uneasy, like I was prying into something I shouldn't. But the image of that shadow, the way she described it so vividly, stayed with me. I looked around my apartment, suddenly feeling exposed, like I wasn't alone. Was this just a manifestation of her stress, or had I been blind to something all along? I didn't know, but the journal had awakened something in me, an itch I couldn't ignore. I had to keep reading. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Julia's journal than just the ramblings of someone stressed out by a failing relationship. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that she had probably just been anxious or paranoid, but the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Something wasn't right. I kept replaying those entries in my head, especially the one about the shadow standing at the foot of our bed. Against my better judgment, I opened the journal again the next day. This time, I started looking for patterns, for anything that might explain why Julia was so disturbed. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something I hadn't before: dates. She had been incredibly precise in documenting specific days and nights when strange things happened. One date in particular stood out: April 14th. I remember that night. It had been a perfectly normal evening, nothing out of the ordinary, at least, that's what I thought. But according to Julia's entry, something had happened. She wrote that she woke up to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway outside our bedroom. She assumed it was me, but when she turned over, I was fast asleep beside her. She got up to check, but no one was there. She felt a strange chill as she walked through the apartment, almost like something had just passed through her. When she returned to bed, that's when she saw the shadow. I thought back to that night. I didn't remember any of it. But now that I was reading her account, little things began to come back to me. Waking up in the middle of the night, feeling cold for no reason, thinking it was just a draft. It had seemed so insignificant at the time, but now I wasn't sure. I started comparing other dates in the journal to my own memories, and to my shock, there were more connections. On another night she mentioned, May 3rd, she wrote about hearing whispers coming from the living room while I was at work. I distinctly remember coming home that night and noticing how agitated she was. When I asked her about it, she just brushed it off, said she hadn't slept well. Then there was June 9th. Julia had written about a dream she had, only she wasn't sure if it was a dream. In it, she woke up in the middle of the night to find the apartment completely silent. She got out of bed, but instead of our living room, she walked into a dark, unfamiliar space, where a figure stood, its back to her. She described feeling a sense of overwhelming dread, like she wasn't supposed to be there. When she turned to leave, the figure turned as well. She woke up screaming. That night, I remember waking up to her crying. She said she had a bad dream, but I never knew it was that bad. As I pieced together these fragments, I started to wonder if I had missed something during our time together. Could there have been something happening in our apartment, something neither of us fully understood? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I had always written off the strange occurrences, noises, feelings of being watched, objects slightly out of place, as coincidence, or just the quirks of living in an old building. But Julia had been keeping track of them, and the more I read, the more convinced I became that she had seen something I had missed. Suddenly, the apartment didn't feel as familiar as it once had. It felt wrong. And for the first time since finding the journal, I started to feel like Julia wasn't alone in her paranoia. Maybe I wasn't either. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the old windows, made my heart race. Julia's words echoed in my mind, and my once familiar apartment now felt like a stranger. The journal sat on the table next to me, open to that page about her dream, or whatever it was. I stayed up late, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself. But it didn't help. I kept replaying the things I'd read, over and over. Eventually, around 2 a.m., I decided I couldn't just sit there any longer. I had to know more. I needed to finish the journal. I grabbed it and started reading again, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. The next entries were darker. Julia's descriptions became more frantic, more paranoid. She started writing about how she felt like she was being watched all the time, even when she was alone in the apartment. She described the sensation of eyes following her movements, lurking just out of sight. Then I reached an entry that made my blood run cold. She had written about an afternoon when she was home alone. She had been lying on the couch, reading, when she suddenly heard a voice, a faint whisper, calling her name. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but then she heard it again, clearer this time, and much closer. She described getting up and searching the apartment, calling out to see if I had come home early. No response. But the whisper persisted, trailing her as she moved from room to room. She never told me any of this. She kept it all to herself. Julia wrote that she became terrified of the apartment. She felt like there was something in it with us, something neither of us could see. The shadow at the foot of the bed, the footsteps, the whispers, it all seemed to connect. But the most disturbing part was what she wrote next. She believed that whatever was haunting the apartment wasn't just watching her, it was watching me too. One night, she woke up to find me standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. She called my name, but I didn't respond. I just stood there, motionless, as if in some kind of trance. Eventually, I turned and went back to bed, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, when she asked me about it, I had no memory of it. According to her, I had done this multiple times, but I had no recollection of ever waking up at night. I dropped the journal, my hands shaking. This couldn't be true. I would have remembered something like that, right? But then again, there had been nights where I'd woken up feeling off. Like I hadn't really been asleep, but not fully awake either. Sometimes I'd have strange dreams, dreams of wandering through the apartment, feeling lost, disconnected. I had always shrugged it off, but now I wasn't so sure. The final entries in the journal were the worst. Julia wrote that she started to believe that whatever was in the apartment didn't just want to watch us, it wanted to come closer. She described nights where she felt a presence sitting on the edge of the bed, pressing down the mattress, almost like it was waiting for the right moment. She didn't stay long after that. One morning, without warning, she packed her things and left. That was the day she ended it between us. At the time, I thought it was just the culmination of our fights, the growing distance. But now, I couldn't help but wonder if she had been trying to escape something far worse. As I sat there in the dark, the air in the room felt heavy, oppressive. I glanced around, expecting to see something lurking in the corners, something that had always been there, hidden just beyond the edge of my vision. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. After reading Julia's final entries, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong in the apartment. Every corner felt darker, every sound heavier. I had spent countless nights here, alone, without a second thought, but now I felt like prey. I tried to convince myself that it was just paranoia, that the journal had planted these thoughts in my head. But the more I denied it, the stronger the presence became. It was subtle at first, Just the feeling of being watched, a sudden draft of cold air that shouldn't have been there. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was seeing shadows where there were none. But then, the nights got worse. I started waking up in the middle of the night with a distinct sensation that I wasn't alone in the room. I'd lie there, paralyzed by a fear I couldn't explain, convinced that if I opened my eyes, I'd see something, someone, standing at the foot of my bed. My heart would pound in my chest, the silence so thick it felt like it was crushing me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I forced myself to open my eyes, half expecting to see nothing, just the darkness of my room. But there was something darker than the shadows, standing in the corner by the window. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, hoping that I was just seeing things. But the figure didn't move, didn't fade. It just stood there, watching me. I froze, my heart racing, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. I wanted to scream, to get up and run, but my body wouldn't obey. The figure didn't make a sound, didn't shift, just loomed in the corner, its shape barely discernible from the darkness surrounding it. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them again, it would be gone. And after what felt like an eternity, I finally forced my eyes open. It was still there. That was the first time I truly believed Julia. She had seen this shadow. She had felt it too. And now, it wasn't just watching me, it was making itself known. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the corner where the figure had been, waiting for it to reappear. But nothing happened. By morning, I convinced myself that it had been a waking nightmare, that my mind had conjured it out of fear and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The next night, I tried to stay awake, terrified of what might happen if I fell asleep again. But exhaustion won out, and at some point, I drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I knew instantly something was wrong. The air was heavy, thick with an unnatural cold. And then, I heard it. Soft footsteps, faint but unmistakable, moving slowly down the hall. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there, listening to them come closer, stopping just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting, knowing that whatever was out there was listening, waiting too. Suddenly, the door creaked open just an inch, and the cold intensified. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I could feel the presence now, standing just beyond the threshold, watching me. My mind raced with memories of Julia's entries, how she had described hearing those same footsteps, feeling that same oppressive chill. She had been living in this nightmare for weeks, and now, it was happening to me. I don't know how long I lay there, frozen in terror, but eventually, the presence seemed to retreat. The door slowly swung shut, and the cold began to lift. I didn't dare move until the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds. That morning, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here anymore. Whatever had haunted Julia was still in this apartment, and it wasn't going to stop until it consumed me too. I packed a bag, not caring where I would go, just knowing I needed to get out. But as I reached for my keys on the kitchen counter, something caught my eye. The journal. It was lying open to a page I hadn't seen before, as if someone, or something, had turned to it during the night. My hands trembled as I picked it up, reading the final words Julia had written. "I can't leave. It won't let me." The words sent a chill down my spine, colder than anything I had felt before. I dropped the journal and stumbled out of the apartment, feeling the eyes of whatever was inside watching me as I fled. But as I reached my car, I realized something terrible. No matter where I went, it would always follow. I spent the next few days staying with friends, trying to escape the oppressive feeling that clung to me. I had hoped that leaving the apartment would bring some relief, but it didn't. The unease followed me everywhere. The sense of being watched, the chilling cold that seemed to settle into my bones, never left me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. My friends were worried, but I couldn't explain to them what I was going through. How could I? They would think I was losing my mind. The only thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't go back to that apartment, not without understanding what was happening. On the fourth day, I made a decision. I had to confront whatever was in the apartment. I needed answers, and I needed to end this nightmare. I returned to my place, armed with nothing but a flashlight and my resolve. The apartment seemed quiet, almost too quiet. The silence was deafening, and every creak of the floorboards felt like an omen. I walked through the apartment, searching for anything out of place. The air was thick with the same oppressive cold I had felt before. Every shadow seemed darker, more menacing. The feeling of being watched was more intense than ever. I tried to ignore it, forcing myself to move through the rooms methodically. I reached the bedroom and found the journal still lying where I had left it. I picked it up, flipping through the pages to see if there was anything I had missed. My eyes fell on a passage Julia had written about a hidden compartment in the closet, something she had never had the chance to explore. The details were sketchy, but it described a small, concealed space behind the wall. With a pounding heart, I moved to the closet and began searching for any sign of this hidden compartment. I pulled out everything I had stored in there, feeling the cold air grow even colder as I worked. My fingers brushed against something solid behind the wall. I tapped and prodded, and finally, a small panel popped open. Inside, there was a small, dusty box. I hesitated for a moment, the fear mounting, but I knew I had to see what was inside. I opened the box, and my breath caught in my throat. Inside was a collection of old photographs and trinkets. At first, they seemed innocuous. Family photos, old letters, and personal items that looked like they belonged to someone else. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A photograph of Julia, but with a figure standing behind her, its face obscured by shadows. As I stared at the photo, a sudden realization hit me. The figure wasn't just a shadow, it was a person, someone who had been there all along. The items in the box seemed to tell a story, but it wasn't one of comfort. It was as if someone had been documenting Julia's every move, watching her, and possibly even influencing her reality. I turned to leave, feeling a strong sense of dread, but as I reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The temperature dropped sharply, and the lights flickered. Panic surged through me as I struggled with the door, trying to force it open. The sense of being trapped, of being surrounded by something malevolent, was overwhelming. Then I heard it, the whispering voice, faint but unmistakable. It was calling my name, the same voice Julia had described. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing around me. In a frantic bid to escape, I grabbed the flashlight and shone it around the room. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the shadowy figure from the photograph. It was right there, standing in the corner of the room, its form more defined, more menacing. I screamed, the sound of my voice mixing with the whispers. I hurled the flashlight at the figure, and it vanished into thin air. The lights flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging the apartment into darkness. I finally managed to force the door open and stumbled into the hallway. I could still hear the whispers, but they were fading, as if retreating with the darkness. I ran out of the building, my heart racing, my mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. I never went back to that apartment. I left everything behind, the journal, the photographs, and any semblance of normalcy. I stayed with friends and eventually moved to a new place, far from that cursed apartment. But even now, I can't escape the feeling that whatever was in that apartment is still out there, watching, waiting. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the whispers, calling my name. The terror never truly fades, it only follows me, always lurking in the shadows, just out of sight.
Persistent contact.
I remember the last fight like it was yesterday. The shouting, the way Alex's face twisted with anger, his eyes burning with a kind of fury that made me feel like I was suffocating. It wasn't the first time we'd fought like this, but something about that day felt final. I had to leave. I had to get out before he consumed me completely. After I ended things, I thought it was over. I blocked him on every platform, Facebook, Instagram, even my phone. I changed my number, deleted old pictures of us, scrubbed every trace of him from my life. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that it wasn't the last I'd hear from him. It started small at first. A strange, uneasy feeling would settle over me when I was alone, as if someone was watching. Then came the messages. The first one was a simple, "I miss you." No name, no number, just an anonymous text. I deleted it and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the messages kept coming, each one more disturbing than the last. "You can't run from me forever. I know where you are." I told myself it wasn't Alex, that he couldn't possibly have found a way to contact me. But deep down I knew. It had to be him. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, hoping it was just another spam email, but my heart sank when I saw the message, "Nice pajamas." I froze, looking around my empty apartment. How could he know what I was wearing? I hadn't posted anything online, hadn't spoken to anyone. I lived alone, my curtains drawn. There was no way he could see me. And yet, the message was there, staring back at me, mocking me. My hands trembled as I blocked the number, again and again. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence, maybe even a prank. But the fear gnawed at me, keeping me awake that night, listening for any sound, any sign that I wasn't alone. A few days later, it happened again. This time, I was out at a coffee shop, trying to distract myself from the growing paranoia. My phone buzzed, and without thinking, I checked the notification. "The coffee looks good. Are you enjoying your time alone?" I nearly dropped my cup. My eyes darted around the room, scanning every face, every figure. Was he here, somewhere, watching me? My breath caught in my throat, and I rushed out of the cafe, barely able to think straight. He was everywhere. No matter what I did, he always seemed to know where I was. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in on me. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside felt like him creeping closer. I checked the locks on my doors at least 5 times, but it wasn't enough. I didn't feel safe. Then came the call. It was late, after midnight. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up the darkroom. A hidden number. I stared at it, my heart racing, my hand hovering over the phone. Part of me didn't want to answer, but another part needed to know. I swiped to answer. Silence. No words, no background noise, just the sound of slow, deliberate breathing. I held my breath, listening, waiting. Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I knew it was him. He wasn't just watching me from afar anymore. He was getting closer. The messages didn't stop after that night. In fact, they got worse, more frequent, more personal. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would skip a beat, knowing what was waiting for me on the screen. He always seemed to know exactly where I was, what I was doing, even when I thought I was completely alone. One message stood out. It wasn't just a taunt or a vague threat like before. This time, it was different. "You really should close your blinds at night." I was sitting on my couch, halfway through a movie when the message came. My entire body froze. I looked around the apartment. The blinds were half open. I could see the faint outline of the streetlights through the gaps. But could someone see me from out there? Slowly, I walked to the window and pulled the blinds shut. I stood there for a moment, staring out into the darkness, searching for a figure, a shadow, anything that might confirm what I already feared. But there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of the night and the occasional car passing by. Still, I felt exposed. I didn't just feel watched. I knew I was being watched. That was when I decided to take action. I went online, searching for ways to protect myself. I bought security cameras, installed a new lock on the door, even put up motion sensors. For a moment, it felt like I was regaining some control, like I was taking back my life from the invisible hands that were gripping tighter and tighter. But the fear didn't go away. A few nights later, I came home late from work. The day had been exhausting, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. As I approached my door, something caught my eye. A small, brown package sat neatly in front of my apartment. No address, no name, just an ordinary box. My stomach churned as I crouched down to pick it up. The weight of it was unsettling, too light, almost like there was nothing inside. I debated with myself for what felt like forever, my mind racing with what could possibly be inside. Part of me wanted to toss it in the trash without looking, but I couldn't resist. I took the package inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and slowly peeled away the tape. Inside, wrapped in a thin layer of tissue paper, was a single photograph. A photograph of me. It was recent, taken from outside my bedroom window, the same night I had received that message about closing the blinds. In the picture, I was sitting on my bed, completely unaware that someone had been watching me. The thought made my skin crawl. I felt sick. There was no note, no explanation. Just that single image, as if to say, asterisk, I'm always here. Always watching. Asterisk. I called the police. I explained everything. The messages, the calls, the picture. They sent someone over, but there wasn't much they could do. The officer I spoke to was kind but dismissive. Without concrete evidence, he said, it's hard to prove anything. He suggested I change my number again and be more careful about where I went. Be more careful. As if I hadn't already done everything I could to lock myself away from him. After the officer left, I sat alone in my dark apartment, staring at the photograph. I felt utterly powerless. The cameras I had installed didn't catch anything unusual, the new lock hadn't been tampered with, and yet, he still found a way in. He was always one step ahead, always anticipating my next move. And I was running out of options. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear every little sound. The wind rattling the windows, the creaks of the old floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Each noise made me flinch, my mind convinced that he was somewhere nearby, lurking just beyond my reach. When my phone buzzed again, I nearly screamed. I didn't want to look, but I had to. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the screen. Liked the picture. I threw the phone across the room and buried myself under the covers, but it didn't help. I couldn't escape him, not even in the safety of my own home. Alex was always there, waiting, watching, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get away from him. I went to the police again the next morning. I showed them the messages, the photo, everything. But once again, they told me there wasn't much they could do. Without clear evidence linking Alex to the messages, they couldn't take any action. We're doing everything we can, they said, but their words felt hollow. I left the station feeling more alone than ever. My friends, the few I still had left, tried to be supportive, but they didn't understand. They thought I was overreacting, that I was letting the past get to me. Just block him, they'd say. Move on with your life. But they hadn't seen the picture. They didn't feel the suffocating dread that followed me everywhere I went. So, I pulled away. I stopped answering calls, stopped going out. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched, like Alex's eyes were on me from somewhere just out of sight. Even in my own apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I shut myself in, locked all the doors, and drew the blinds, determined to cut him off completely. I deleted my social media, changed my email, even switched to a new phone number, again. But it didn't help. The messages kept coming, this time through anonymous emails. No matter what I did, he always found a way back in. One night, I got an email that was different from the others. It wasn't just another taunt or threat. Attached to the message was an audio file. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling as I hovered over the play button. Something told me not to listen, that whatever was on that file was something I wasn't ready to hear. But I couldn't stop myself. I hit play. At first, there was nothing, just silence. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. It was mine. I was talking to myself, muttering things under my breath, things I only ever said when I was completely alone. The recording was from my apartment. I recognized the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of my refrigerator in the background. It was me, talking, moving around, recorded without my knowledge. I felt the room spin around me as I realized what this meant. He had been inside my home. While I was there, watching, listening. I slammed my laptop shut and backed away, my heart racing. I didn't know how he had done it, how he had managed to record me without me knowing, but it didn't matter. The truth was clear. I wasn't safe. Nowhere was safe. Desperation clawed at me. I checked the cameras I had installed, hoping for some clue, some sign of how he was getting in. But there was nothing. No footage of anyone entering or leaving, no signs of a break-in. It was as if he was a ghost, slipping in and out of my life without leaving a trace. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every shift of the apartment made my skin crawl. I kept expecting to see him standing in the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought more locks, stronger ones this time. I doubled up on security, adding extra bolts to the windows and reinforcing the door. I installed more cameras, more motion detectors. My apartment was turning into a fortress, but it still didn't feel like enough. The worst part wasn't the fear of him breaking in, it was the fear that he was already inside. Somewhere, watching, waiting for me to crack. Every day, I felt more and more isolated. My friends stopped calling. They'd given up on trying to reach me. And I couldn't blame them. I was shutting everyone out, too afraid to let anyone in. Too afraid to let them know just how bad it had gotten. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could outlast him, that he would eventually give up and move on. But the longer it went on, the more I realized I was wrong. He wasn't going to stop. This was a game to him, and I was losing. One night, after another series of sleepless hours, I heard something that chilled me to my core, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were soft, barely audible, but they were there, moving through the hallway outside my apartment. Slowly, deliberately, I grabbed my phone and crept to the door, pressing my ear against it, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door. I held my breath. Seconds passed, then a minute. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, my heart racing in my chest. Then, a soft knock. Not the loud, forceful knock of someone trying to get your attention. This was different. It was slow, deliberate, like he was letting me know he was there. Letting me know he could reach me anytime he wanted. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, steady, as I whispered into the phone, explaining that someone was outside my door, that I needed help. I waited in silence, my back pressed against the door, listening for any sound, any sign of movement. But there was nothing. When the police arrived, they found no one. No signs of forced entry. No trace of anyone in the hallway. But I knew better. He had been there. He was always there. After that night, something inside me snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the constant watching over my shoulder, the feeling that my own home had become a prison. I was exhausted, mentally and physically, always on edge, always waiting for him to make his next move. But I couldn't live like that anymore. I needed to take control. I needed to stop hiding. The police weren't going to help. My friends didn't believe me, and I couldn't blame them. Even I was starting to doubt my own sanity. But the knock on the door, the emails, the recordings, it was all real. He was real. And if no one was going to protect me, I'd have to protect myself. I took some time off work, not that I was getting much done there anyway, and spent the next few days preparing. I researched everything I could about self-defense, about stalking laws, about how to deal with someone like Alex. I bought pepper spray, a taser, anything that would make me feel less vulnerable. And then, I waited. Every night, I would sit in the dark, my back against the wall of my bedroom, listening to the sounds of my apartment. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old wooden floors, the occasional footsteps from the neighbors above. But nothing from Alex. And then, one night, he made his move. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it, a faint clicking sound coming from the front door. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, listening as the noise continued. It was the sound of someone trying to pick the lock. I'd prepared for this moment. I knew it would happen eventually. But now that it was here, I was frozen in place, too terrified to move. I wanted to grab my phone, call the police, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like my mind was screaming at me to act, but my limbs were paralyzed by fear. The door creaked open. I heard the soft rustle of fabric, the quiet shuffle of feet as someone stepped inside. My body tensed. This was it. He was inside my apartment. I couldn't see him from where I was sitting, but I could feel his presence, like a cold, oppressive weight in the air. I forced myself to move. Slowly, silently, I reached for the taser I had hidden under my pillow, clutching it tightly in my hand. My heart pounded in my chest, the adrenaline rushing through me, making my hands shake. But I stayed still, waiting. The footsteps got closer, moving down the hallway toward my bedroom. They were slow, deliberate, like he was savoring every second, knowing I was inside, knowing I was probably terrified. The door to my bedroom creaked open. In the faint light coming from the street outside, I saw the shadow of a figure standing in the doorway. Tall, dark, and familiar. It was him. I didn't need to see his face to know it. I held my breath, staying perfectly still as he took a step closer, then another. He was almost inside the room now, his figure looming in the darkness like a predator stalking its prey. I could see the glint of something in his hand. A knife, gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act. With a scream, I lunged forward, hitting the button on the taser and thrusting it toward him. The room erupted in a flash of light as the taser connected with his body. He let out a strangled gasp and stumbled backward, crashing into the wall with a heavy thud. I scrambled to my feet, shaking, my heart pounding out of my chest. He was lying on the floor, twitching slightly, trying to regain control of his body, but the taser had done its job. He was down. I didn't wait. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the operator what had happened. "He's here," I whispered, my eyes never leaving his body on the floor. "He broke in. He had a knife. Please, send someone." The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. I stood there, shaking, watching him, waiting for him to get up, to move. But he didn't. When the police arrived, they found me standing in the doorway, still clutching the taser, my hands trembling. I could barely speak as they pulled him out of the apartment, his face still contorted in pain from the shock. It wasn't until they took him away that I finally felt like I could breathe again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was safe. The nightmare was over. Or so I thought. The days following the incident were a blur of police reports, legal meetings, and sleepless nights. Alex was in custody, charged with breaking and entering, harassment, and assault. I thought that would be the end of it, that my life could finally return to some semblance of normalcy. But the relief was short-lived. I tried to resume my routine, but the sense of dread never completely left me. Every sound, every movement in the dark was a reminder of the terror I had endured. I had hoped that confronting Alex would close this chapter of my life, but instead, it seemed like the nightmare was just beginning. One evening, about a week after the break-in, I was sitting in my living room, trying to distract myself with a book. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. I was beginning to think that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe the worst was behind me. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting another spam message or maybe a notification from a social media app. Instead, there was an email from an unknown address. My heart sank as I opened it, bracing myself for more threats or disturbing messages. But what I saw was different. The email contained a single line of text. "You thought it was over." Attached to the message was a video file. My hands trembled as I clicked on it, the anticipation and fear mixing into a nauseating cocktail. The video started with static, then shifted to a dark, grainy shot of my apartment building. The camera panned slowly, revealing the entrance to my apartment. My heart pounded as I saw myself on the screen, leaving for work one morning. The video was clearly taken from a hidden camera, capturing my every move. It showed me walking out, locking the door behind me, and then, something even more chilling, the figure of someone slipping into the building right after me. The footage was old, but the realization that someone had been watching me, tracking my every step, made me feel sick. I was being surveilled even after everything that had happened. My phone buzzed again. Another email, this one with a message that made my blood run cold. "You're not safe anywhere. I can get to you anytime, anywhere. This is only the beginning." I wanted to scream, to throw my phone against the wall, but I had to stay calm. I contacted the police immediately, showing them the new evidence. They were concerned but seemed helpless. "We'll look into it," they said, but their words were hollow. I felt like I was falling through the cracks, the system failing me again. The worst part was the isolation. I had pushed away all my friends and family, believing I was protecting them from Alex. Now, with no one to turn to and the police seemingly powerless, I was completely alone. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in on me, the darkness pressing in, suffocating. One night, I decided to go through every security camera I had installed, searching for any clue, any sign of where Alex might be. I reviewed hours of footage, hoping for some reassurance, but the more I watched, the more unsettled I became. There were no signs of him entering the building recently, no indication that he was still nearby. But the fear lingered, gnawing at me from the inside out. Then, in a moment of quiet desperation, I remembered something. I had a backup key hidden under a rock in the flower bed outside my apartment. It was a precaution, something I thought would never be needed. But now, it felt like it might be important. I went outside, the night air cool against my skin. I knelt by the flower bed, my fingers shaking as I retrieved the key. I unlocked the door and went inside, checking every corner, every closet. There was nothing, no sign of anyone having been there, no trace of Alex. Still, the fear wouldn't let up. I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of anxiety and paranoia. As I closed the door behind me and locked it securely, I heard a faint noise, a soft knock, almost imperceptible, coming from the other side of the apartment. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the sound. My heart raced as I moved cautiously toward the source, but there was no one there. Just the silence of my empty apartment. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat awake, my eyes fixed on the door, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Every creak, every gust of wind made me jump. I was convinced that Alex was still out there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike again. In the days that followed, I continued to live in a state of heightened alert, the paranoia consuming me. I didn't know if Alex was still out there, or if he had just succeeded in making me a prisoner of my own fears. All I knew was that my life had been irrevocably changed, and the shadow of his presence still loomed over me. Even with the police involved and my security measures in place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was always being watched, that the nightmare was far from over. Every day was a battle, and I was losing ground. I had to find a way to reclaim my life, to find a semblance of normalcy in the chaos. But until then, I would remain vigilant, clinging to the hope that someday, somehow, I could finally be free of the constant terror that had taken over my life.
The message from beyond the grave.
I've always found solace in routine, and after Ethan's death, I clung to it more desperately than ever. The apartment felt empty and hollow without him, but it was mine now, my sanctuary from the chaos of our tumultuous relationship. I was slowly finding my footing again, trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. It was a chilly October evening when I first noticed the email. I had been curled up on the couch, reading a book, when my phone buzzed with a new notification. It was an email. The sender's name made my heart skip a beat. Ethan. I blinked at the screen, thinking it must be some cruel joke. Ethan's death was recent, and the idea of receiving a message from him seemed impossible. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers trembling as I tapped the notification. The email opened, and I scanned the short message. Asterisk. You thought I was gone forever? Asterisk. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that Ethan's email account had been deactivated after his death. The message seemed like a sick prank, and I tried to convince myself of that. But the words were written in his unmistakable style, short, sharp, and unsettling. I quickly deleted the email, hoping it would be the end of it. I tried to push it from my mind, chalking it up to an elaborate hoax or a technical glitch. But as the hours passed, I found it impossible to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The apartment was eerily quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old building settling. I tried to sleep, but the image of that message lingered, taunting me. I told myself I must have been imagining things, or that someone was playing a cruel joke on me. But deep down, a nagging fear began to creep in, whispering that there might be something more sinister at play. #### Part 2. Voices from the past. The next morning, I woke up with a lingering sense of unease. The email from Ethan was still on my mind, but I convinced myself it was just a prank. It had to be. I tried to dive into my daily routine, distracting myself with work and chores, but the anxiety clung to me like a shadow. By midday, I had almost managed to push the email out of my head when my phone buzzed again. Another notification, this time a voicemail. I felt my stomach drop when I saw the caller ID, Ethan. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. It didn't make sense. His number had been disconnected. He was gone. But there it was, his name staring back at me like a bad dream. Slowly, I opened the voicemail and pressed play. At first, there was nothing but static, a faint hiss that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. But then, through the crackling, I heard it, his voice. Soft at first, barely a whisper, but undeniably Ethan. Sarah. You can't escape me. My blood turned to ice. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. It was his voice, his exact tone, the way he used to speak when we fought, when he was trying to manipulate me. But how? How could he be leaving me messages? I replayed it, thinking maybe I had misheard, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But no. It was Ethan, and he sounded as real as the last time I'd seen him. Desperate for answers, I called a mutual friend, Mark. He had been close to Ethan, one of the few people who knew about our messy breakup. I asked him if there was any way someone could be using Ethan's account or phone to mess with me. Mark sounded confused. Sarah, his accounts were all shut down after the funeral. His phone too. This isn't funny. Are you sure you didn't just imagine it? I wanted to believe him, that it was all in my head. But I knew what I had heard. Ethan was dead, but his voice, his presence was still there, invading my life like a ghost. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the apartment felt amplified. The creaking of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of cars outside. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, waiting for something else to happen. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message, another voicemail. And then, just past midnight, it came. A notification lit up my phone. Another voicemail. From Ethan. I held my breath, fear tightening my chest as I pressed play. This time, his voice was clearer, more menacing. I'm always with you, Sarah. You can't run. The room felt colder, the darkness around me heavier. My pulse pounded in my ears. I knew something was very, very wrong, and this was just the beginning. The voicemail played over and over in my head, each word sinking deeper into my mind like a dark infection. Asterisk, I'm always with you, Sarah. You can't run. Asterisk, I tried to convince myself that there had to be some rational explanation, but each message felt more personal, more real. It was like Ethan's presence was wrapping around me, slowly tightening its grip. I couldn't stay in the apartment that night. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and every corner seemed to hide a shadow that didn't belong. I packed a small bag and headed to my sister's house. I didn't tell her the real reason I was there. How could I explain that my dead ex was leaving me threatening messages? She would think I had lost my mind. Hell, maybe I had. At her place, things were quiet for a couple of days. I started to relax, thinking that maybe the distance would help, that maybe being away from the apartment was enough to stop whatever was happening. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. On the third night, as I sat in the living room alone, my phone buzzed. A text. The sender. Ethan. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands felt like lead as I opened the message. Asterisk. I see you, Sarah. You can't hide. Asterisk. I dropped the phone. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched, and I spun around, scanning the room. The house was empty, just me and the silence. But his words, they felt like eyes burning into the back of my neck. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtains closed, my breathing shallow and quick. There was no way he could know where I was. No way he could be watching me. I tried to call Mark again, but it went straight to voicemail. Frustrated and terrified, I sat on the couch, rocking back and forth, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe someone was hacking into Ethan's accounts. But why? And how could they know where I was? That's when I decided to go back to the apartment. As terrifying as it sounded, I needed to face whatever was happening. I couldn't keep running. I packed my things, made some excuse to my sister, and headed home, my mind racing the entire way. The fear gnawed at me, but so did the need for answers. When I stepped through the door, everything felt wrong. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the apartment had been waiting for me. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, the silence heavier. I forced myself to sit down, staring at my phone, waiting. I knew another message was coming, and it didn't take long. This time, it was an email. The subject line sent a chill through my body. Asterisk, we're not done, Sarah. Asterisk. My pulse quickened as I opened the email. Inside was a single attachment, an audio file. My finger hovered over the play button, dread pooling in my stomach. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I had to. I had to know. I pressed play. The file was a recording of my own voice, but not from any conversation I remembered. It was me, arguing with Ethan. The words were sharp, angry, full of resentment, things I'd never said, but the emotion was real. It was like he had captured moments of our worst fights and twisted them into something darker, something that didn't belong in the past. At the end of the recording, his voice came through, low and cold. Asterisk. You thought you could get rid of me, but I'm still here. I'll always be here. Asterisk. The room felt colder than ever. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding. This was no longer just a prank. Ethan was dead, but somehow he was still tormenting me, still controlling me from beyond the grave. And I had no idea how to make it stop. The voicemail played over and over in my head, each word sinking deeper into my mind like a dark infection. Asterisk. I'm always with you, Sarah. You can't run. Asterisk. I tried to convince myself that there had to be some rational explanation, but each message felt more personal, more real. It was like Ethan's presence was wrapping around me, slowly tightening its grip. I couldn't stay in the apartment that night. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and every corner seemed to hide a shadow that didn't belong. I packed a small bag and headed to my sister's house. I didn't tell her the real reason I was there. How could I explain that my dead ex was leaving me threatening messages? She would think I had lost my mind. Hell, maybe I had. At her place, things were quiet for a couple of days. I started to relax, thinking that maybe the distance would help, that maybe being away from the apartment was enough to stop whatever was happening. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. On the third night, as I sat in the living room alone, my phone buzzed. A text. The sender. Ethan. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands felt like lead as I opened the message. Asterisk. I see you, Sarah. You can't hide. Asterisk. I dropped the phone. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched, and I spun around, scanning the room. The house was empty, just me and the silence. But his words, they felt like eyes burning into the back of my neck. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtains closed, my breathing shallow and quick. There was no way he could know where I was. No way he could be watching me. I tried to call Mark again, but it went straight to voicemail. Frustrated and terrified, I sat on the couch, rocking back and forth, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe someone was hacking into Ethan's accounts. But why? And how could they know where I was? That's when I decided to go back to the apartment. As terrifying as it sounded, I needed to face whatever was happening. I couldn't keep running. I packed my things, made some excuse to my sister, and headed home, my mind racing the entire way. The fear gnawed at me, but so did the need for answers. When I stepped through the door, everything felt wrong. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the apartment had been waiting for me. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, the silence heavier. I forced myself to sit down, staring at my phone, waiting. I knew another message was coming, and it didn't take long. This time, it was an email. The subject line sent a chill through my body. Asterisk. We're not done, Sarah. Asterisk. My pulse quickened as I opened the email. Inside was a single attachment, an audio file. My finger hovered over the play button, dread pooling in my stomach. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I had to. I had to know. I pressed play. The file was a recording of my own voice, but not from any conversation I remembered. It was me, arguing with Ethan. The words were sharp, angry, full of resentment, things I'd never said, but the emotion was real. It was like he had captured moments of our worst fights and twisted them into something darker, something that didn't belong in the past. At the end of the recording, his voice came through, low and cold. Asterisk. You thought you could get rid of me, but I'm still here. I'll always be here. Asterisk. The room felt colder than ever. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding. This was no longer just a prank. Ethan was dead, but somehow he was still tormenting me, still controlling me from beyond the grave. And I had no idea how to make it stop. I barely slept that night. Every sound, every creak, felt like a warning. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent for now, but it felt like a ticking time bomb. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the words from the voicemail and the email in my mind. Ethan's voice haunted me, twisting my memories of him into something nightmarish. By morning, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. I had to get out of the apartment. I couldn't take the oppressive atmosphere, the constant fear of what would come next. I decided to take a walk, try to clear my head. The fresh air helped a little, but my thoughts were still clouded with dread. I wandered aimlessly, not even noticing where I was going until I found myself standing outside the cemetery where Ethan had been buried. My stomach churned as I stared at the gates. I hadn't been here since the funeral. The thought of facing his grave made my skin crawl, but something inside me urged me forward. Maybe seeing his grave, seeing proof that he was really gone, would help me make sense of what was happening. I walked slowly through the rows of headstones until I found his. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, staring at his name etched into the stone. The flowers from the funeral were long dead, wilted and decaying, a reminder of how much time had passed since his death. But as I stood there, a new wave of unease washed over me. I wasn't alone. There, on the edge of my vision, I saw movement. Just a shadow, quick and fleeting, but enough to send a jolt of fear through me. I whipped my head around, scanning the area, but there was no one there. Just the quiet stillness of the cemetery. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my paranoia playing tricks on me. But then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out of my pocket, my hands trembling. Another voicemail, and this time, the timestamp showed it had been sent just minutes ago. My heart sank as I saw the caller ID, Ethan. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I stood there, in the very place where he was buried, about to listen to a message from beyond the grave. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed play. "Why are you here, Sarah?" His voice crackled through the speaker. "You think you can hide from me? Even here, I see you." I froze. My eyes darted around the cemetery, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. The voice continued, low and menacing. "You should have listened, Sarah. You should have stayed away. But now, you're mine. Forever." I backed away from his grave, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The world around me felt wrong, like I had stepped into some twisted version of reality where Ethan still had power over me. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty cemetery, my mind racing with terror. When I finally made it back to the apartment, I locked the door behind me and collapsed on the floor, shaking. I couldn't keep this up. Whatever was happening wasn't just a series of coincidences. Ethan, something, was trying to torment me, trying to drive me mad. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't go on like this. I needed help, but who would believe me? That my dead ex-boyfriend was somehow sending me messages, stalking me from beyond the grave? I thought about contacting the police, but what would I even tell them? I could already hear how ridiculous it would sound. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, accuse me of making it all up. No, I was on my own in this nightmare. The messages kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. Ethan, or whatever was pretending to be him, was getting bolder, more direct. He knew things, details about my life that no one else could know. It was as if he was watching me, waiting for me to slip, to lose control. I spent the next few days in a haze, constantly looking over my shoulder, never feeling safe. I disconnected my phone, hoping that would stop the onslaught of messages, but they still came, through emails, through new voicemails that appeared from nowhere. It was like there was no escape. Then, one night, as I sat in the darkness of my apartment, my laptop screen flickered. I froze, watching as a video started playing on its own. At first, the screen was black, but then an image came into focus. Grainy, shaky footage of me. I was sleeping in my bed. I watched in horror as the camera slowly panned over my room, moving closer to my sleeping form. My heart raced as I realized someone had been in my apartment, watching me. But the worst part came at the end of the video. Just before the screen went black, a voice whispered softly, "I'm closer than you think, Sarah." I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. He wasn't just tormenting me from a distance anymore. He, or it, was here, inside my home. And I didn't know how to stop it. I couldn't take it anymore. The relentless torment, the constant fear, it was consuming me. I was living in a state of perpetual dread, unable to sleep, unable to think clearly. Ethan's presence was everywhere, and I was trapped in a waking nightmare that I couldn't escape. Desperate for a solution, I decided to take a more drastic approach. I contacted a local paranormal investigator, someone who specialized in cases like mine, though I wasn't sure if I even believed in ghosts. I needed answers, and I was willing to try anything. The investigator, a woman named Linda, arrived at my apartment late one evening, her face lined with concern. "Tell me everything," she said as she set up her equipment. Cameras, voice recorders, and a device I didn't recognize. I recounted everything that had happened, from the initial messages to the disturbing videos. Linda listened intently, taking notes and nodding as I spoke. When I finished, she took a deep breath. "It sounds like you're dealing with something very troubling. We'll do a full sweep of the apartment, see if we can pick up anything unusual." As she worked, I watched nervously. The apartment was filled with the hum of equipment and the quiet murmur of Linda's incantations. I was skeptical, but I was also desperate. Hours passed, and Linda finally sat down with a serious expression. "I've picked up some unusual readings," she said. "It seems like there's a strong presence here, something connected to your ex. It's not just a regular haunting, it's something more." She handed me a small device with a digital readout. "This is a spirit box. It lets us communicate with whatever is here. I want you to ask it questions, see if you can get a response." My hands were shaking as I held the device. "What do I ask?" "Ask it what it wants, why it's here," Linda instructed. "Sometimes, confronting it directly can help." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "Okay." I took a deep breath and spoke into the device. "Is this really you, Ethan? Why are you doing this? What do you want?" The spirit box crackled to life, the static interspersed with faint, distorted voices. My heart pounded as I strained to hear anything clear. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it, a familiar voice, though distorted and twisted. "You can't escape me, Sarah. You never could." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was unmistakably Ethan's voice, but filled with a malevolence I had never heard before. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The response came again, clearer this time. "You were mine. You still are. I will never let you go." I could barely breathe. It wasn't just Ethan, it was something darker, something that had taken his form and twisted it into something horrific. Linda's expression was grim as she watched the reading spike. "We need to perform a cleansing," she said, her voice resolute. "This entity is feeding off your fear. We have to expel it." The cleansing ritual was intense. Linda chanted in a language I didn't recognize, and the apartment seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a pressure that seemed to press down on me. But as the ritual progressed, the air began to lighten, the oppressive weight slowly lifting. Finally, Linda finished, and the room felt different, lighter, less suffocating. The spirit box was silent now, the static replaced by a calm quiet. I was exhausted, but a small part of me felt a glimmer of relief. Linda packed up her equipment, her face tired but relieved. "It's not over yet," she warned. "You may still experience some residual effects, but the worst should be over. Keep yourself safe, and if anything strange happens again, contact me immediately." I thanked her and watched as she left, feeling a strange mix of relief and residual fear. I wasn't sure if the entity was completely gone or if it had just retreated. But as I stood in the now eerily quiet apartment, I hoped that whatever it was had finally left me in peace. That night, for the first time in weeks, I managed to get a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. The oppressive presence that had hovered over me seemed to have receded, though the memory of Ethan's voice lingered like a shadow in my mind. I knew I had faced something terrifying, something beyond my understanding. But I had survived, and that was all that mattered for now. As I lay in bed, I hoped that the nightmare was truly over, and that my life could finally begin to return to normal. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope, a quiet promise of peace.